Okay.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the show. My guest tonight is Mark Anderson. Mark, hello.
How's it going, Alex? Great to be back on your show. It's been a while.
So you got quite some scoop here. Tell us all about it.
Well, at American Free Press, my main news outlet, we got early tips that Bilderberg is going to meet in Turin, Italy, Turin, Turin, Italy, June 7 through 10. This is one of the earliest, if not the earliest times that we've known about it in terms of the calendar year. Usually we don't know this stuff with reasonable certainty until at least latter February or even March or early April. So we're glad to report that we have a pretty good handle, partially thanks to the Serbian government of all places, as to where Bilderberg will meet this year.
So, in essence, they slipped.
It would appear so, coming out of the Davos World Economic Forum in Switzerland, which is a Bilderberg social watering hole to a degree, not in its entirety, but to a degree. And coming out of that, where the Serbian prime minister attended and took part in a program, there was evidently a slip, if you want to call it that. It would appear so, yes.
Okay, so when one conference is over, do they already have the next location planned out?
Almost certainly. The steering committee, which has 31 members, counting its chairman, the former insurance magnate Henry de Castries, a Frenchman, I'm sure that by all indications, they plan well ahead. And they, of course, decide who to invite, including the newcomers like the Serbian Prime Minister Ana Brnabic, if I'm saying that right. If I'm butchering her name, I'll be forgiven.
That doesn't matter.
But who to invite in terms of new people so they can move up the corporate political ladder, which is part of what Bilderberg's about. It's a groom and advancement agency, among many other things. So for purposes of picking the new people, inviting the stalwart core members, where to go, what to talk about, they plan well ahead. I suspect they have two or three figured out at any given time as to where they're going to be. Of course, we have to be careful they're not planting false leads here. There's always that possibility that they're trying to distract or mislead people like you and I, Alex, and many others in the alternative media. And so we'll keep our eyes open, but it's pretty firm coming out of the World Economic Forum that given the Serbian government announcing that its Prime Minister, Ana Brnabic, is going, she was invited by de Castries, it's looking pretty positive. So I'd be surprised if this isn't correct that they're meeting in Turin, Italy, but I'd give it at least an 80% approval rating.
Okay, so we asked our own, I'm getting an echo here, but we asked our own government-run media in Germany once why they were not covering Bilderberg. And the answer we got was, well, we don't know in advance where it's going to be, so we can't schedule our reporters, and thus we don't get pictures, and if we don't have pictures, we don't have a story. So now I think we will have more than enough time to schedule and to monitor this and to schedule the reporting to be there and to it's not just reading between the lines, because in Davos there's a lot of lines being put out there that you have to read between them. But with Bilderberg you don't get any lines, or very few lines, and you basically have to read between the members and the membership list. You have to kind of piece it together, who these people are, what they've been doing so far, and what they're doing now. So this is kind of like an art form that has been perfected over the years. And now, of course, people are a bit spoiled with leaks, right? People expect now the big leak, the database and thousands and hundreds of thousands of pages. But before this kind of age of big leaks, things were different. And I think these old school skills need to be preserved, need to be expanded, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. We all need to be a little bit of a Sherlock Holmes or a Columbo. Um, Bilderberg has been going on since 1954. This will be their 66th meeting here in Turin, Italy. Last time they were in Italy was Stresa in 2004. They've been in Italy two other times, so four times total in Italy, counting later this year, June 7 through 10. Yeah, it takes good old-fashioned gumshoe reporting, not just being online and looking for vague, sometimes misleading connections. And yeah, we have to use good old discernment and deduction and logic, and like you say, look at who's going to be there, look at what their credentials and their pips are, as they say, and look at past precedent, look at the people that have been there a long time, what sort of things have come out of there. Daniel Estulin, as a footnote, a longtime Bilderberg investigator, this past May in Louisiana, he debuted a documentary on Bilderberg that he put together, and I happened to attend that. We don't need to go into a lot of details, but a lot of people like Jim Tucker, who handed the gavel to me at AFP, and Daniel Estulin are trying to turn the corner on Bilderberg. In other words, we've been intrigued with these guys a long time. We need to get a lot more information on them now. We need to really nail this down. We don't want to just chase them year after year after year. We want to see what other groups the Bilderberg organization might have created, splinter groups, offshoot groups. What else are they doing? Not just the standard Bilderberg narrative as well, Alex. So deeper into Bilderberg, but also beyond Bilderberg. What else are these people up to when they're not at Bilderberg? How much is the World Economic Forum that just happened in Davos? How much is that tied to Bilderberg? We don't know for sure. We know there's some, but we do know that this announcement that they're meeting in Turin, Italy, came right out of Davos. So, yeah, it's it's kind of like three-dimensional chess, but I think we're getting a better handle on it. And as you say, the mainstream media has no excuse now. They have 6 months notice.
Yeah, so, and in essence, it's research about power structures, right? Bilderberg is very, very important in that, but we're still trying to figure out how this global structure is organized and what their methods are and what their secrets are. And maybe a week ago I asked the question, what's the big difference these days between the East and the West? Because when the topic is Russia, now the argument is, in Russia, you can't tell the difference between a CEO, somebody from the mob, and somebody from the government, and somebody from an intelligence agency. And I asked the question, what is the big difference nowadays, right? I mean, we see the guest list, right, of Bilderberg, and there's a lot of CEOs, they run companies, and there's some politicians, and there's some, but you know, when we're talking about politicians, we automatically assume that they're puppets. They're somebody's puppet, right? Because they're politicians. They need other people's money to run for office. But when it's about these CEOs, we don't ask the question, or we don't usually ask the questions, are these just puppets? Are they just cutouts? Are they just frontmen? Or is this whole company they represent just an intelligence front, right? Because where are the boundaries anymore? Where's the boundary when, you know, one big internet company does the cloud-based infrastructure for the intelligence agencies, and everybody's collecting your data? So where are the boundaries anymore? I mean, you see a guest list of Bilderberg and the supposedly separate entities, but I'm not buying it.
That's very interesting, Alex. It does tie into some things that I've either written about or thought about. You know, after World War II, the U.S. had developed a lot of things. You know, in 1947, through a certain piece of legislation, the OSS became the CIA. The Pentagon was built that same year. The Department of War became the Department of Defense. And war became a really big business then. And you've got to have something, we spoke off the air, that keeps the naval boats in the water and keeps the jet fighters in the air, keeps the defense contractors fat and happy. And in the process over the decades, as this deep state, military, industrial, intelligence, media, usurious money system, banking complex came into existence and really solidified, all those lines were blurred. And absolutely, Bilderberg represents, as I've often said, kind of a Politburo for private government, where government itself has been in essence privatized. I've said that before on this show, and that means all those lines are blurred. So a CEO is a banker, is a intel guy, is a politician. It all just kind of melds together.
There's not even a distinction anymore, I think, between government and private. I mean, has there ever been in this, Bilderberg circle? Where do you draw the line between government and private when there's companies that get these that are dependent on government contracts, and then you have government that is dependent on what these companies build for them? I mean, there's no distinction anymore. There's no distinction anymore.
Yeah, well, you have lobbying is sort of the first level, as you know, Alex. People with lots of money, the big pharmaceutical companies in the U.S., the big food, the big candy companies, believe it or not, in the U.S., the big water bottlers, believe it or not, in the U.S., and others, gun manufacturers, you name it, are lobbying Congress. But that, just people lobbying lawmakers to do what they want doesn't necessarily mean that there's a blurring of the lines. But that's sort of the square one. That's sort of the foundation. From there, the revolving door comes into place where people like Christopher Dodd serve on the banking committee. And then when they're done, they go into the private sector and they serve in the banking fraternity. So from lobbying, you go to revolving doors. But from revolving doors, the next level is where everything is under one roof, right? You don't even need to use a door to get from one place to the next.
Yes.
And so, yeah, then you're looking at the actual melding. And I think that with world government, which is what Bilderberg is partly about, they're a networking organization. They make sure that they're firing on all the right technological and banking and defense and intelligence pistons. Make sure the pistons and cylinders are firing in all those different areas. They all exchange notes and exchange ideas, and they go back to their respective companies and governments, and they help implement those things.
They're a big family. They're a big family, right? It's a dysfunctional family, but they're a family, so to say.
Yeah, call it a monarchy of corporate and government power. Who needs a crown anymore, right? When you've got 5G and blockchains and worldwide surveillance, who needs a crown on your head anymore, for crying out loud? You can just meld these things together. You can keep up the fear factor. You can say the war on terror is over through the media that you own. You can say the Cold War is back 2.0, and keep the boats on the water, keep the planes in the sky, and it's a very lucrative thing for those that go there. But it's funny how we worry about lobbying, Alex, but we don't worry about it when a U.S. Senator like Tom Cotton last year, when Bilderberg met in Virginia, we don't worry about it when he meets behind closed, sealed doors with intelligence and banking officials from our own country, but also from foreign countries, and the press, the mainstream press, not saying anything about it. Next thing you know, Tom Cotton, the youngest senator in modern history, only served one term in the U.S. House, now is on deck to possibly head the CIA. Now, if that's not the coveted Bilderberg boost of your career, I don't know what is. I'm not sure this guy can tie his shoes straight, although he was a soldier and he did some respectable things. He went to Harvard. But you got Ana Brnabic of the Serbian prime minister being one of the newer, younger talents that Bilderberg is tapping. You had Tom Cotton last year. Yeah. You have all these things going on.
But maybe those guys who seem really boring.
We don't worry about this stuff. Go on. I'm sorry.
But it's exactly those guys who seem really boring. Maybe they're the interesting ones. Maybe there's been some stuff going on that we don't even know about, because there's always a reason they get picked for this type of thing. And
absolutely. And Tom Cotton, just a quick note, pushes all the right buttons on anti-Iran, pro-Israel without any conditions, anti-Russia in a sort of simplistic way, anti-China in a simplistic way. Not that all Bilderbergers necessarily feel that way. On an individual level, I'm sure they have some differences of opinion, but in terms of their geostrategic thinking, I think they're pretty much on the same page. Otherwise, they wouldn't even be invited. So that being said, it's going to shape up to be an interesting year here when they meet in Italy.
So maybe the one big difference nowadays between the East and the West is that in the West, you are allowed to complain and you are allowed to voice your opinions, but you don't really know who's running things. And in the East, you absolutely know who's running things, but you're not allowed to complain. You know what I mean?
That is brilliant, Alex.
So
And
that
it
is
is so
like,
true.
and I think that on certain levels, of course, it's, competition in the market is still real, and competition in politics is still real to some degree on a certain level, because that keeps people very, very busy. They spend all their time with their corporations and their political career, and so they don't have the time and they don't have the expertise to actually understand the power structure, right? It's a need-to-know principle, the whole, way of doing these things. So, yeah, that's probably the difference between the East and the West. And the reason for Bilderberg to exist in the first place was to fuse America and Europe together against Russia, against the Soviet Union. When at the same time, Bilderberg companies sold a bunch of stuff to the Russians. And now we're in this situation today with a president like Trump and this big investigation, and nobody knows where it's going to go. And you know what I think? You know what I think happened?
What?
I think some friends of Donald, people he knows from the Deutsche Bank, who's always represented at Bilderberg and who's, laundered a bunch of Russian money. I think that some friends of Trump just, or some people he knows told him before 2014, before the Ukraine crisis, before everything seemingly changed, they told him, go to Russia, do business with them, because this was encouraged at the time. I mean, we've had all these major parties in Europe and major politicians in Europe, and they all loved Russia up until 2014 when they were told not to love Russia anymore. And so I think this is basically what happened. This could be really what happened. These powerful people, they told Trump, well, go to Russia, make business deals with them. Let them buy your properties. Let them buy your stuff. Don't worry. You got our green light. It's like, we will take care of anything, if all of this, espionage stuff, and if we lure these Russians to the US and their money, this could be great for espionage. So go ahead, Donald. Don't worry about all this espionage thing. That's our business. You just do financial business with them. So I think that's what happened. And Bilderberg presents itself as this gathering where people chat and drink coffee and that sort of thing. But in the intelligence world, the most important stuff could happen when two people meet in a coffee place. Good things and bad things. Good things and bad things.
But 140 of them meet, 2 or 140 like Bilderberg. 140 is not a lot of people when you consider the scope and breadth of what these people are talking about at their Bilderberg meetings. That's a small number of people. The Trilateral Commission, kind of a sibling of Bilderberg, has like 500 and some members from the U.S., Europe, and Asia. They add the Asia element, hence Trilateral 3. So yeah, I mean, imagine what 140 can do, drinking coffee, drinking wine, and getting a little loose-tongued, a little loose with their pocketbooks. And, our intelligence people meeting with foreign bankers, our congressmen, like last year, Senator Tom Cotton and Lindsey Graham, the South Carolina Republican, meeting with foreign intelligence people and foreign bankers. And, why the press wouldn't be interested in this has always been beyond people like you and me and others that have covered this, like UK Column and 21st Century Wire, that have really paid attention to this. American Free Press, of course, early on with Jim Tucker. And so, yeah, absolutely, Alex. It's business as usual, I think, probably behind the facade of, oh, Russia's the bad guy. At last night's January 30th State of the Union speech that Trump gave to Congress, his first official State of the Union speech, January 30th, Tuesday, 2018, he referred obliquely to China and Russia as foes, like terrible things are happening.
Rivals, yeah. I mean, to be precise, I got the quote. I just looked it up here in the complete transcript.
Good.
He was... let me find this. Yes. So he lumped China and Russia into a specific sentence, in a specific category, and that's notable. He said, around the world, we face rogue regimes, terrorist groups, and rivals like China and Russia that challenge our interests, our economy, and our values. So Russia and China now get grouped into the category of problems, right? Rogue regimes, terrorist groups, and rivals. That's notable, well, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And the thing to look for, as you said off the air, was whether Bilderberg companies, which already have done significant business with Russia, as you've found out, and I've looked into it a little bit, are they going on with business as usual? Since Bilderberg, is sort of indifferent to a nation state's core needs, Bilderberg will do whatever they have to do to advance their business as well as their political interests, since business and political interests are pretty much one and the same to them anyway, with all the think tanks that do the thinking for the states, the governments, and the corporations. That's one of the things that connects governments and corporations is the research institutes and the think tanks like Brookings. And Brookings is always there, just like Deutsche Bank is always there. Yes. Council on Foreign Relations and Chatham House is always there as well. And that leads back to the Anglo-American establishment around the time of Cecil Rhodes and that whole monetary lineage and that industrial lineage. So, yeah, with Bilderberg, I'm sure there's several deals with Russia still going on. A lot of them probably in the areas of energy, probably some military materiel. It's hard to say what kind of limitations there might be on that. We can look into that between now and when Bilderberg meets, of course, and beef up our research on both ends of the Atlantic Ocean on that one. But yeah, this is shaping up to be very interesting. So,
well, Carol Quigley said, "I'm not buying this East versus West, doomsday, narrative." He said that he doesn't expect World War III and blowing up the whole world. He said instead he expects a coexistence between these superpowers while keeping up the tension and having a proxy war here and there, but in essence keeping up the tension, and that's what they understand as stability. So maybe what Trump said at the State of the Union address was just everybody's idea of stability. And it seems counterintuitive to some people, but if you keep the pressure on, that's what these countries need. You keep the pressure on, everybody puts pressure on the other side, and thus they stay stable and they can spend all that money on rockets and whatnot. I mean, that's something that Trump said at the State of the Union, to build more nukes or better nukes and that sort of thing.
What you're saying here, Alex, is very important in the general sense. I call it globalese, the language that these people in Bilderberg and Trilateral and the Chicago Council on Global Affairs and Chatham House, the language they speak when they say America's interests or, the free world's interests, they're really talking about corporate interests. When they talk about stability, stable for whom? Free markets for yes. whom? And stable, stable meaning don't mess with the status quo. We want calm waters all the time. We're going to make it look like rocky waters for the regular people, big waves coming in, tsunamis, but we want placid waters. We want the money to flow no matter what, and the deals to be made, and the status quo. A friend of mine in Canada with the awakeningnews.ca, he runs a news website up there. He says the biggest conspiracy is the status quo.
Yes, definitely. So I have a list here as a short list of some very well-known companies associated with Bilderberg, and they kind of built the Eastern Bloc. So where's the investigation in that? Where's the investigation into that? Where's the special counsel? Where is, the big media blitz on that? So first of all, we have here IBM. So we have people like Ballmer. We have Ballmer at these conferences. And so IBM sold computers to the Russians during the Cold War and after the Cold War. And interestingly enough, the second president in the history of IBM, Mr. Thomas Watson Jr., he used to be a fighter pilot. And he used to fly during World War II a very high-ranking U.S. official to Moscow on a regular basis. So he was shuttling this guy to Moscow and back. And this guy he was shuttling around was the director of the Lend-Lease program, whereas the Soviet Union received a lot of goods from the United States, like tanks and weapons.
Let me stop you there. I looked into Lend-Lease for a library presentation to the general public I did last fall in 2017, Alex. I looked into Lend-Lease and, Major Racy Jordan's diaries, and he was the processing army clerk that saw what was in the briefcases and would break some of the briefcases open during the Lend-Lease shipments, many of which went out of northern Montana across the Bering Straits to Alaska and then onward to Russia. The amount of technology and industrial know-how and raw materials and entire factories that were sent to the Soviet Union at the time is so staggering in its sheer amount and value that you cannot even put a limit or a price tag on it. It was absolutely, positively staggering.
Bonkers.
And a lot of U.S. soldiers died crashing. Their planes would crash in the snow in the mountains. Some of their bodies were never found. Transferring all this stuff while the Nazis and Russia were grinding each other down and World War II was going on. This was happening. We had already decided that the Soviet Union was our friend, even though we knew Stalin had committed atrocities that the New York Times covered up through Walter Durrani, the reporter that lied about the starvation going on in the Ukraine under the Stalin regime. We knew that the Soviet Union post Tsar Nicholas was a really bad apple, and we gave them all the war material and industrial know-how that we possibly could, and then some. And then David Rockefeller, of course, helps Russia build the Kama River truck factory. He puts the first ever Chase Manhattan or Chase Bank, whatever it was called then. The first branch of that bank ever in Moscow was put there by David Rockefeller. And then David Rockefeller, who was with the Army intelligence for a short time, goes on to found and help establish Bilderberg.
Yes,
and then CIA money, which was part of the European movement, was admitted by Richard Aldrich, a British professor at Warwick College, whatever it's called. CIA money helped fund the first Bilderberg meeting. So, the CIA itself seems to be sort of a halfway house between government and industry.
And all of a sudden, this whole Trump-Russiagate thing seems very, very small in comparison. And it also goes back to these circles, because apparently they gave their green light, right? I mean, when Trump started doing business with the Russians and meeting with them, when this was encouraged, this was something that you should do. I mean, was there anybody, any powerful, entity or person that, had a coffee meeting with Donald and said, listen, Donald, I'm with these intelligence circles, and you shouldn't do business with this guy and this guy and this guy. Maybe that guy, but not these guys here. And we'll just give you some advice, whom to trust and whom not to trust. Was there anything going on like this? Was anybody, telling Donald to step on the brakes? Apparently not. Apparently they set him to step on the gas and, let us handle the messy details or anything that's going on in the background. It's not your thing to worry about, Donald. Go and have some fun. Go and do some business.
Interesting. Hard to say for sure. One thing is, how long ago did they know that Donald Trump might run for president? Well, the answer partially is that as long ago as 2012, because in 2012, I attended myself the Conservative Political Action Conference, and Rand Paul was there on the non-interventionist Republican side. Then you have all your neocons like Dick Cheney and those kind of people. Well, who is there? Donald J. Trump in the earlier days in 2012.
Interesting.
In his initial attempt to consider running for president.
Interesting. I mean,
so they would have had at least the knowledge since 2012 that Trump might run again.
Yes, and also his business dealings were more or less public for the larger part. And so if America spends all this taxpayer money on the CIA and the FBI, which are supposed to provide protection against foreign intelligence agencies, to counter espionage. I mean, it was their job to tell Donald, maybe you should step on the brakes here and do business with this guy, but not that guy. This would have been a coffee meeting, right? This would have been a coffee meeting. But if actually this investigation turns up something, I don't believe there's any super mega large smoking gun. Maybe they find something that's not really meaningful, but could mean an impeachment. I think if they find something like this, they would not use it for impeachment. They would use it to force Trump to toe the line.
That could very well be. Maybe that would at least partly explain his rather brusque remarks last night at the State of the Union. Um, like you say, it could be for stability, or maybe he's just obliged to say those sort of things to keep people satiated, to keep them off his back. Because a couple of weeks, 3, 4 weeks ago, he's talking about, making friends, making amends with Russia. But if Carol Quigley was right and the East-West thing is just a dialectical game, and there are some significant signs that that is the case, then in a way that's comforting, which is ironic, but in a way it tells me that we're not really under any direct, imminent threat of
Yes.
worldwide destruction, but we are under the duress of the constant news, the fake
Tension.
news, the tension,
fear,
the taxation, the debt, the spending, all the economic ramifications that keep most of the people in one or two paychecks away from poverty. We are duressed with that, but it tells me that the status quo is important to them. So worldwide destruction is not necessarily the first thing on their agenda. If I may offer a lighter sort of more pleasant tone to an otherwise rather dark topic. So
yeah. Well, I mean, let's go back for a second to this guy from IBM, this Watson guy. So he shuttled around this important person, learned Russian, and became the United States ambassador for the Soviet Union. The guy from IBM. The second president in the history of IBM was an ambassador to the Soviet Union. And so so a lot of Soviet computers were basically IBM clones, and in 1992, after the supposed end of the Soviet Union, there were plans for an IBM factory in Russia. And then there was a subsidiary of IBM in Europe that sold 17 supercomputers to Russian nuclear labs, and these computers are used to simulate weapons tests. So you don't do the old school tests anymore. You simulate them down to the last detail.
Wow,
so
that's interesting.
This is public information. Nobody knows about this. Nobody really knows about this because it's not in the news, just like the Donald Trump thing. I mean, they're never going to find anything large on Donald. They're just looking for some little thing, like he made an imprecise statement under, to someone, and maybe, that can be used against him. But I mean, this is Bilderberg. This is what we're talking about here. And then, of course, the car companies. Don't get me started on the car companies. Fiat, Ford, all the stuff they built in the Soviet Union. Siemens. And whenever there's business, there's also intelligence business. Everybody knows this. So why is this Trump thing so big?
Right. If I'm following you right, Alex, and correct me if I'm wrong, please. Bilderberg represents what they think they're going to find on Trump, and has since 1954.
Well, it's like...
In other words, Bilderberg is the kind of collusion that they're trying to pin on Trump. But because it's not one man that they can nail to the wall, because it's this conglomerate Politburo, it's just not as sexy as nailing the Donald.
Yeah, but how can you accuse Trump of selling out America to the Russians when it was the FBI and the CIA who should have been on top of this in the first place? So you can't condemn Trump without at the same time condemning the FBI and the CIA and all these other three-letter agencies. I mean, this is just basic logic here.
Right. And granted, the Russia of today is not exactly the Soviet Union of yesterday, but I think it's still fair and sufficiently accurate to say, where were they? What happened during Lend-Lease? What was that about? How did that even happen? All the way through the 50s and 60s, when Rockefeller was helping with the Kama River Truck Factory, which was reportedly building vehicles that were helping kill American boys in Korea and Vietnam. Where was all this condemnation of collusion with the Soviet Union then, since it was a far worse regime than Putin's Russia now, although I wouldn't want to be on the wrong side of Putin's Russia. I don't wear rose-colored glasses. I do think some media gives Putin a little bit too easy of a time, even some alternative media. That being said, it's not the old Soviet Union. But yeah, for decades, this stuff has been going on, collusion with Russia. And as a matter of fact, when I gave that public presentation on Lend-Lease, when I promoted it, I said, The promotion in essence was, you've heard of collusion with Russia under Trump. Well, you haven't seen anything yet. And then I showed the lists on a big overhead of the materials that we
Yes.
sent to Russia under Lend-Lease. Again, so staggering that the mind can't even, you can't wrap your mind around it. It's just beyond the pale.
So Trump at the State of the Union address said that we have these problems, and these is terrorism, and it's rogue regimes and rivals like Russia and China. And then he went into North Korea. Now,
oh yeah,
I don't believe Donald even knows about Skull&Bones. I don't think he even knows about the history of the CIA, that it went all the way back to the Skull&Bones network. And so you see a few Skull&Bones members around the administration. You know, there's certain people there who are part of this kind of this Trump universe. So, for example, we have Steven Mnuchin. He's a Skull&Bones guy, and yeah. Then we had, I think, one of the guys who was a possible cabinet member was Stephen Hadley, who's probably Skull&Bones. And then we have, I think, Schwartzman. I think it was Schwartzman. Let me look this up real quick.
Yeah, Hadley comes out of the CFR trilateral mold too. Yeah.
Yeah. So, let me see. Yeah, Mr. Schwartzman. That is kind of the person that comes to mind. So, Schwartzman and Trump, they know each other. Steven Schwartzman, he's a billionaire. He's got $10 billion. That's an estimate. And he's from the Blackstone Group, and he used to lead Trump's Strategic and Policy Forum, kind of like a link between the White House and the CEOs, the big company CEOs.
Was that forum since Donald became president?
This was during Donald's presidency, and
yes. Okay, and that also included Peter Thiel, a Bilderberger who's been in the White House several times. What that means, we don't know exactly, but Peter Thiel seems to be another link.
He makes the fancy software, you know, for the CIA and the police and the military. What's it called, Palantir?
Yeah, Alex Karp is involved in that, right?
Yeah, where you can guess, we can guess where the rebel leaders are, and it basically determines where they're going to be and all that sort of fancy stuff, right? So this is kind of the circle. And so Schwartzman, he was also involved 2011 in the Russian Direct Investment Fund. So Russia paid 10 billion, and foreign countries, other countries, they paid 30 billion. And so he's been playing this game too, Mr. Schwartzman, right? But there's no investigation, there's no big, media blitz and is Schwartzman a traitor or whatever. No, he just did this in the shadows, and you always know when there's business, there's intelligence business too.
Yeah, business is business, right. Mm-hmm.
And Mr. Schwartzman has an interesting connection to China, which of course is a place where Skull&Bones has been heavily invested in. And you have a program in China called the Schwartzman Scholars. This is kind of a nod to the famous Rhodes Scholars. And so, I mean, if a guy like Schwartzman from Skull&Bones has a group over there, there's some espionage going on, maybe, probably, certainly, who knows?
That's interesting. As a quick footnote, Skull&Bones going back quite a ways there, known for the number 322, I believe that connection would partly involve opium, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, just satisfying my memory on that.
Yeah, so
very intriguing there.
So Skull&Bones goes back to the British Empire and the opium trade and the opium wars. And so, and of course, Anthony Sutton, when he looked into this, I mean, he wanted to write this big book about China and the Anglo-American establishment. He never got around to do it, but he mentioned China, I think, in his large Skull&Bones book, and he said that the Yale University had some serious spy programs in China. And, and even recruiting some of the later communist revolutionaries that became powerful over there. And then he went into, Skull and Bones people in America, especially the war ministry at the time. The Americans supplying, the American government supplying ammunition to the Chinese communists, thereby letting them win. So this is a huge thing in history. So everybody should look into that more. And so you have this Schwarzman Blackstone group, and they're involved in China and all this stuff. And then you have, so you had Trump. You got these Skull and Bones people around Trump, and they're involved with China and so on. And then I've looked into the last Korean War, the Korean War in the 1950s, and there's Skull and Bones fingerprints all over it. And of course, later on, the Bilderberg Circle, they helped China to develop into this big industrial juggernaut. But a few years back, you had these Skull and Bones people selling technology to the Soviets, who then sold it to North Korea. And
yeah, because North Korea was a client state at the time, right?
Yes, exactly. And so
yeah,
this was step number one, arming the enemy, right? Through an intermediary. We just sold this stuff to the Soviets, and they sell it to the North Koreans. And then was this public statement. There was a public statement in the U.S. Mr. Dean Acheson.
Oh, yes.
He was a member of Scroll and Key, not Skull and Bones, but it was still Yale. And I think they're even linked. These secret societies in Yale, they're all linked. And so Dean Acheson, he basically said through so many words that America is not going to be involved that far away in Korea. So whatever the Koreans are doing with each other is not America's business. And then some...
Well, that sounds familiar.
Yeah, and then some Soviet defectors actually told us that some fake intelligence was thrown, at Stalin and North Korea, confirming the same thing. We're not going to get involved in Korea. So that's when Stalin decided to give the green light. So North Korea invaded the South, thinking America is going to stay out of it, but of course America didn't stay out of it. The US government said, holy cow, what happened here? We need to get involved. And so...
Yeah, just like the green light that the US official April Gillespie gave to Saddam Hussein's Iraq.
Exactly.
He went into Kuwait, Gulf War I, Operation Desert Storm, Desert Shield commenced, and the rest is a very sad history.
Yes, and then it's
especially with depleted uranium being used in so many more munitions.
And then when the war was going on, this is kind of the worst case scenario, right? Back then, and this is what people are afraid of now. And we're gonna find out some stuff during this year's Bilderberg conference. Maybe some Asian guests are invited. Something that tells us something about the North Korean conflict. And people are afraid that the war is going to start and it's going to be a hot war. And back in the first Korean War, the American military, the American generals, they had some very precise ideas about what to do. You need to cut off China from North Korea by destroying the bridges and so on and so forth. But there was sabotage.
River, right.
Yeah, but there was sabotage from the top, from these Skull and Bones circles. There was sabotage which continued the war. It went on and on and on, and the front line moved north and then south and then north and then south again, killing millions of people. And where did it end? At the same spot where they started. The same spot where they started. And one of these famous military officers, he actually smelled there was something wrong. So you had Defense Minister George C. Marshall, and he told General Douglas MacArthur, the famous MacArthur, he told him to go north, push north. and north he pushed. And so then the Chinese, they sent their troops, 200,000 soldiers. And so this went back and forth, back and forth. So, and so Douglas MacArthur was surprised about the Chinese soldiers. And so he had a concrete plan. He said, let's bomb these bridges, stop this influx of Chinese soldiers. But
that's right.
He was sabotaged from the top. He was absolutely sabotaged from the top.
Just as in a slightly different way, General George C. Patton in World War II was relieved of effective duty and not allowed to do what would be much more effective by Eisenhower. And Eisenhower, of course, is known for the D-Day invasion. Any real military strategist would tell you the D-Day invasion plan was the most wrong-headed, stupidest military move in the history of the human race. Let's get off of these widely visible, plainly visible boats in the water, wade through the water where your legs can hardly move, and get gunned down by batteries of German machine guns.
Yes.
Let's do that. Yeah, that's a good plan. And so
I think the whole goal of this the Second World War was to kill as many people as possible everywhere. This was kind of the only discernible.
Yeah, but just to finish my train of thought, Patton was known to have a plan that would have pushed back on Russia, the Soviets. He knew that they were a threat, that it wasn't just about Nazi Germany, and so Patton, like MacArthur later, these guys were relieved of their duty. Of course, when MacArthur came home, he received standing ovations, ticker tape parades. He was still a hero. The American people had more discernment back then. They knew a real hero, more or less, from this arbitrary set of rules that he was given, and he couldn't believe that anything short of victory would be promoted by a U.S. interest. But as you're saying, Alex, these ancestors to Bilderberg, the Skull&Bones, which goes back much further than Bilderberg, were already in the business of merging government and corporations, thereby corrupting proper public policy, thereby leading to death and destruction on a much larger scale than would otherwise have existed, creating wars that would have never happened for the sake of profit, as you say, through proxy deals, sell it to one and then they sell it to another. The whole kibosh, the whole Gordian knot. But what I really like, Alex, is
what was Patton's plan again? What was Patton's idea again?
What now?
What was the idea of Patton? What was his idea? What should have been done?
Well, he was going, I don't have this nailed down exactly. I'm going by memory. I haven't read about it in a few years.
Pushing the Soviets east where they started?
Yeah.
Not giving them half of Europe?
Yeah, he had a plan that would have pushed them back. He conceived of the fact that they were going to swallow up a lot of territory and probably not give it up. I don't have a lot of details right in front of me. I'd have to refer to some books on my shelf over here to refresh my memory. But I'm simply comparing him to MacArthur in that they both had more principled, better military plans that would have won a lot more freedom for people and would have ultimately led to a lot less tyranny and a lot less in terms of the Soviet archipelago, the gulags that followed once the Soviets secured their power. We have the Yalta Agreement, where FDR is accused by having Harry Hopkins, a very questionable government operative, with him at Yalta when FDR's health was failing. They met with Stalin. Many credit that meeting with giving away half of Europe to the Soviet Union. Lend-Lease kept going through all of that. And so, wow. It's just incredible. We can't get to every strand of the tapestry and all that in the show today, and I do have to kind of wind up.
But we see the continuity, right? We see the continuity. It went from the Skull&Bones.
It's incredible.
Then moving over to the Bilderberg crowd, especially Kissinger and the old guard, which is still active. I mean, of course, Rockefeller died, but Kissinger is still around, and he was involving himself in the Trump administration. So you have these people running around, and I don't even think Donald Trump knows about Skull&Bones.
He might know of them. Donald Trump is more of a politician than he admits, but he's primarily a businessman. He didn't get where he was without some intrigue of his own. His top lawyer for years was Roy Cohn. Roy
Yeah.
Cohn is the Jewish lawyer that helped Joe McCarthy at the Communist House Un-American Activity Committee. House Un-American Committee activity.
Didn't he also do some court cases with Soviet espionage? I think.
I
think nuclear. I think he did some cases about nuclear espionage.
Yeah, that always throws me. House Un-American Activities Committee. I don't want to talk too fast. Get my facts straight. But no, I think that Donald Trump is more of a new money guy. He's not from these old bloodlines per se. I don't have any confirmed, reliable knowledge that he is. If I ever find some, we can talk about it. So I think he's cut from a little bit different cloth, and we see him vacillating between what he really wants to do and what the old line power brokers want him to do. I think that's why we see him flip-flopping on certain issues, but staying firm on others. He has to make some concessions over here so he can get a deal that he wants on the other side. It's got to be a tough go. There's no way we can know it all, but the questions that we've raised here today, Alex, are going to really help us plumb the depths of this next Bilderberg meeting, because now we have a lot more time to work with. It's February 1st tomorrow as we film this here on January 31st as we're shooting this. We got all of February, all of March, all of April, all of May, and into early June to really read the tea leaves more accurately on what they did in recent years that's going to carry over into this year and what new initiatives they might start. And go to AmericanFreePress.net and you can read my dispatch on this that just came out. That's AmericanFreePress.net. I also have a blog, thetruthhound.com. There'll probably be a version on there and so on and so forth. I believe 21st Century Wire is picking it up. So and ukcolumn.org. So we'll see how things are going. But we in the alternative media, I think, are sort of left to do this on our own. I don't think the mainstream will come on board much, but now at least they have time, and there's no excuse that they were given no advance notice. So,
well, do you think that you're going to be there this year?
I expect to, especially with this much time to raise some funds. If it was April or May right now, I'd probably be shaking my head.
Well, it's a huge trip from the U.S. I mean, it's a short trip from here because I'm pretty sure I'm going to be there. It's a very short trip to Italy, actually. Europe is kind of small, right? It's very, very tight spaces. So I'm pretty sure I'm going to be there. And
that's good to know. That is really good to know, because I couldn't make Dresden in 2016, and you were there, and your photographs were spot on, great. So we'll see how it goes, but I hope to with this much notice. I'm gonna certainly try.
Yeah, and I mean Bilderberg has I think revived the East-West paradigm. It's kind of this it's full on now. I mean it's the new East-West paradigm, the new Cold War. Bilderberg sort of made it happen, and we'll see what gear is going to be their next one. What they're going to do next, and of course. The membership list will be of great significance this year, and also we're going to shoot everybody who goes there by airplane. We're going to see a lot of interesting faces, I think, and yeah, try to deconstruct what they're doing, what the next step is going to be, and what the deception is going to be, because there's always going to be deception, right? I mean, Italy.
Yeah, it's worth remembering that last year there was 3 White House officials there. The H.R. McMaster, the National Security Advisor, Wilbur Ross, the Commerce Secretary, and one Nadia Shadlow, who's in the defense establishment. It's been a long time, talking about last year when Bilderberg met in Virginia, it's been a long time since 3 sitting administration people were there, along with Senators Cotton and Graham. So that's a little, if the word troubling fits, so be it. It's a little, it's worth noting, that's for sure, that the Trump administration had people to that degree there, along with those 2 senators. Mm-hmm. Some of their topics, ironically, were last year, their official topics at Bilderberg were the Trump administration, a progress report. Kind of ironic. Maybe they were there to give a progress report to Bilderberg. That's probably what it was. Other topics last year, at least the official ones that they're admitting, are transatlantic relations, options and scenarios. Another one, the Transatlantic Defense Alliance, bullets, bites, and bucks. Bites, of course, spelled B-Y-T-E-S. Then another, the direction of the EU, quote unquote. Another one, and you see this one all the time among these globalist groups. Why is populism growing? Why is populism growing? Well, I can tell them that. But anyway, another was last year, Russia in the international order. And then among the other ones was the war on information. And I don't know if they mean their war on other people's information or what they perceive as bloggers and hackers conducting war against government databases. It doesn't explain. Another one of their topics last year in 2017 was simply China. As we know, some of their topics are literally one word, China. And so some of these topics might be completely mythical and they weren't even discussed at all. I think a lot of them are true, but no doubt there's topics that they discuss that are never listed, and there's attendees there who are never listed. And one thing, as we part today, Alex, I'm going to be shooting a note over to the Bilderberg's news department and basically saying the jig is up. You know, you can pound on the Serbian government for leaking this if you want, but since we know about this, why don't you give us the attendance list now? Why don't you give us the topics list now? We'll see what they do, see if they respond.
Yeah, that will be interesting. And of course, if Bilderberg is so worried about Russia and is so worried about especially Russian espionage, why are they having this meeting in Italy? I mean, Italy traditionally is full of Russian spies, so why are they coming here? Why did they go to Germany when, of course, you know, Soviet or Russian espionage was very pronounced in Germany, right? Especially at you know, Dresden. So why are they even coming here? I mean, this must be an intelligence nightmare to organize this meeting and to you know, triple check everybody who, you know, empties the trash cans and that sort of stuff. Just a side note, if they're so worried.
Scanners. They got these new things they advertise on TV where you can put it up against a wall and it'll tell you where the beams are, so you know where to pound the nail, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they probably have to turn the entire hotel upside down, let alone the hotel staff.
A modern electronic bug to listen to, you know, to listen in on conversations. It's not like in the Cold War where it's this big thing with an antenna sticking out, a little battery. They're so small. They're so small. They can be hidden in anything. It could be the plastic casing of something, or, you know, it could be anywhere. A modern bug doesn't even need a microphone anymore. It picks up the vibrations caused by noise or human voices. And so these bugs, they can translate these signals back to speech. So how in the world are they doing these conferences in Europe and not do them in Chantilly every year? It's just baffling to me.
A funny thing, I'll part with this. I do got to kind of keep moving here, Alex. I got some errands here, but a funny thing in 2015 when Bilderberg departed the Austrian hotel, the Interalpen, and the police already cleared it, and they took the tape down, and they said we could go inside the hotel. And as we did this, me and Vít Zelika, I can never say his name. He's from the Czech Republic. He's a videographer, and he created that small principality called Liberland. You might have heard about that. But anyway, I was with him, and we were actually supposed to meet Peter Thiel at a golf course, and it never happened. He thought it would.
You were supposed. Okay. Yeah, I would have loved to see that.
So we look, and the police are putting out the trash at the Hotel Interalpen. So how many times, when do police put out trash?
Yeah.
Who does that, right? So we go in the hotel, and just for fun, I gesture to my friend, oh, maybe they left a USB drive in this couch, and I flipped the mattress up a little, and I'm just joking around. And I walk into the bar area, and the bartender, or not the bartender, well, I saw the bartender, but the hotel owner comes up to me and another guy from Michigan who was a independent journalist and just screams in our faces, you know, his nose 1 inch away from mine, and tells me, sounding like an SS stormtrooper, to get out of his hotel just because I looked under a mattress kind of playfully.
Yeah.
I think that's what it was. But So, you know, I mean, by then you'd think the place would have been all cleaned out and debugged, but they were still that sensitive about somebody even looking under a rug, under a tiny corner of a rug, or in
The bugs are not active when people are looking. They can. There's all kinds of stuff nowadays. This is not the Cold War anymore. Stuff has advanced. So, oh my God.
It's a more humorous note to end on, but it was funny because.
Yeah, but maybe that's the point. Maybe they spread disinformation and hope the Russians pick it up. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows exactly. My friend even had a room booked there, and they made him cancel his reservation and put him out in the snow. But by the time we left, we had photographs inside the hotel of huge bags of shredded paper, the largest trash bags you can get. And so showing that Bilderberg is still doing a lot of things hard copy and shredding all the paper and leaving these big bags for the police to throw in the trash. And then computer components, the computer components that you no longer need, like keyboards, are left behind, but the hard drives are taken and wires are just left hanging there. I'm only sharing this as sort of an anecdotal thing, but it's
maybe the bug isn't. Maybe the bug is in the keyboard. I mean, I don't know, man. This is just this whole idea of having a meeting like this. It just seems idiotic to me in this day and age. But maybe that's the point.
I don't know why they don't meet at a mansion like one of the Rothschild mansions. Why are they meeting at hotels? But these are just sundry questions that people have often asked. But thanks for having me on the show, and I'm glad we could get this out early. That evidently, unless they're throwing us a curve, they're going to meet in Turin, Italy, June 7 through 10. Their 4th time in Italy since they met in '54. This will be their 66th meeting. So we'll be looking through the tea leaves and deconstructing this a lot more in the days and weeks ahead, Alex. So
yeah, it's going to be a crazy event. Well, hope to see you there, and good luck to you.
Thanks, Alex. Great job in discerning this Russian connection.
Thanks for being on my show.
Yep.